Anxiety, it freaks me out, it's driving me, it creeps me out, inside of me, it beat me out, I'm going, anxiety.
Hey guys, this is Brian with BAM, Being Anxious, Anxious Me. So today's focus is going to be on psychopaths and the idea of method acting, right? So again, in my last video we were talking about how charisma can help you lowering your anxiety. Now, think about psychopaths, and there's this idea that they don't have any anxiety. So basically what we're trying to do is get to that point. There's a theory behind, psychology and deviant behavior that says that psychopaths actually can be an evolution to man, eventually. Of course, these individuals are very perplexed and complicated. Basically what they do is have the ability to turn on their emotions so they can change in different situations. And what we're trying to do is kind of emulate them, kind of practice being them in a sense so it can lower our own anxiety. Basically what we're doing is blending in. Now, understanding what a psychopath is in its own self is any individual that engages in antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior doesn't mean that, you hate talking to people and everything like that. That could be a symptom actually. But mostly what it is that you are doing the opposite of the norm. The norm being what society is. So you're antisocial, anti-society. Understanding this, we understand that they have no anxiety at the same time. So they'll engage in, fearlessness. They'll, actually be very successful with a lot of things that they do. But this also says that they get very bored, so they engage in risky behavior. And for the most part, this is where the idea that they murder, because mostly this is the one thing that is forbidden. Why? Because as hierarchical beings, we understand that there's levels to understanding, and that we always have to, follow what is placed upon us. So this is the law. So we're always going to have a law because we're hierarchical beings. And then, of course, what psychopaths do, or sociopaths do, they basically break these norms. They break the law. They do the opposite. Now, funny enough, a lot of self-help books, basically promote doing the opposite of the norm, being your own person. So why is this? Basically, what we're doing is facing our own fears just like a psychopath. Of course, we have a lot more emotions than what would be considered as a psychopathic, tendency to live, right? So the more that you are on the spectrum as a psychopath, the more you engage in promiscuous behavior, anything that has to do with deviant behavior, and, of course, you'll have some contributed psychopathy, any psychopathology, and mental disorders as well. But that's going to be different. What we're going to look at is basically the underlying behavior of being charismatic as a psychopath. So there's this book by Kevin Dutton, who's an Oxford professor of research psychology, right? So he looked at many individuals like Randy Hattrick, who's the CEO of Anywhere Fitness, or Andy McNabb, who's a SAS hero, basically Secret Air Service from Britain. And, these two individuals are very successful. Randy Hattrick was actually a Navy SEAL, which was really interesting because he had this tendency to always be very aggressive. But because he channeled that anger and that frustration into focus, he went into this almost meditative state of always wanting, having, and giving stimulus to his environment. So we're always going to understand that our biology engages into our environment, so it's always going to reciprocate. But because he had these tendencies that were, considered psychopathic, he became a little bit more successful than the most, because what most people do is they follow the norm. So again, there's a book that Dutton and McNabb actually collaborated on, and it was called The Success of a Good Psychopath. So they coined this term. But basically what we're going to do is coin our own term. It's not a good psychopath. We're going with emotiopaths, right? So it's the emotional path that we're going to actually delve into our emotions as we feel the anxiety. So what they always have done has felt, right. And of course, most oftentimes what feels right isn't what is right. So that's the antisocial behavior that's underlying that. So understanding why is this? Why is it that there's some good psychopaths and some bad psychopaths? It's understanding that, there's a strategy idea in criminology, right? So this is my field. You have this R and you have this K strategy idea. So the further you are away from the K, the more likely you are to engage in antisocial behavior. So, of course, this also means that your heart rate is a lot lower than normal, and most likely within the years of 4 to 9, within that, toddler kind of preteens situation, this is going to be anything that we engage in a lot of risk-seeking behavior. So understanding that is that anything that has to do with R is most likely masculine, right? You're going to have males that are most likely R, so they'll engage in more, sex. They'll have more partners, intimate partners, more likely to copulate in higher numbers. And the Ks are most likely women. But of course, what it is, the difference between the two is the idea that one is more invested into their children than others. So of course, you'll have like sharks that once they have babies, they're done. That's it, right? And you have humans who are a little bit more on the nurturing side, right? So, we'll nurture our babies for maybe a year, 2 years, until it starts becoming a little bit more independence, and then we give it a little bit more independence. So understanding that is the little spectrum that you have. Now, what Kevin Dutton actually did was he created this survey, and out of that there was the Psychopathic Personality Index, and basically it's this long 200 question survey basically asking about your tendencies. The highest number you can get, I think it's like a 630 or 650. I actually got around like 560 or 530 or something like that. So I have high tendencies to, engage in risky behavior, more than normal people for the most part. And understanding this, I can actually gauge why I make the decisions that I do. So you're always questioning why you're doing the things you do, the motives behind it, and everything like that. So, of course, I'm not a psychopath, but I see the tendencies and the spectrum behind it. So it's almost like an autism spectrum. There's more than others, but this one is understanding that, of course, I'm very emotional, so my cold-heartedness is not going to be very high. It's going to be like at 50%. But, of course, I do have the tendency to cut people off without any remorse or whatsoever. So, understanding that, I can, kind of gauge every situation a little bit more different. So, understanding what this is understanding that, there's genes, right? And I personally believe that this psychopathic idea is basically what they call the warrior gene, right? So there was this National Geographic documentary with Henry Rollins, and here they actually, interviewed Randy Hetrick, and how he kind of forced himself to discipline himself and focus on his success, right? Of course, he made the craziest idea and basically took the biggest financial risk that you can take. So you have that. You have that idea that you can be very successful by being very psychopathic at the same time. So this idea of being psychopathic is very similar to the idea of the warrior gene. So these individuals, most likely men who carry, the Y gene, don't have an extra X gene, cannot control their anger. So that's why we engage in criminal behavior for the most part. Now, this goes into oversimplification, of course, of the idea that there are other resources and other environments that influence what crime really is. But, as a criminal justice major, it makes sense that the idea is that it becomes genetic, because most likely if you're more aggressive, your children will be more aggressive, and you will clash together, of course, just because you're button heads, and most likely they'll engage in their environment that same way, because their biology influences the environment, just like how we let our environment influence us at the same time. So this is basically going into the idea of being present. So you have this emanation of energy from our own selves, just because every living thing has a living essence to it. So, what presence is this idea that you're trying to understand that there is no real tomorrow, that time doesn't really exist, that it's a social construct that we've practically based on our own selves, right? We try to measure things just because we try to understand what really is going on in life. Okay, so now we have an understanding that we're always trying to understand things. And first, what it is that we understand that we're very anxious people. We have anxiety. Next is our tendencies and how we try to combine these two. So it's a very interesting topic of quantum physics and how they measure a lot of the emotion frequencies that we have. Mostly there's two specific ones. So it's love and then it's fear, right? So love is longer wavelengths, and then fear has shorter intervals, right? And a lot more faster. So anytime we feel fear, our anxiety shoots up. And when we feel love, we feel like everything slows down. So understanding what presence is basically this emanation of energy that's coming out from us, right? So a lot of how the magnetism of the earth and the universe is from the center. There's a center essence. Again, we're understanding that there's a living thing with all things, right? Like plants, the earth, us, the universe, and everything like that. So we're emanating this magnetism outside. And this is basically what is attracting other people towards us. I don't know if you ever met anybody that was very grounded, like they had gravity towards them, or they, charm people towards them, or you can feel their energy. Basically, that's what the presence is. The more that you practice this presence, the more you understand that it's a mind gap. It's a space between ourselves and time. So this happens because most often time is what gives us more anxiety, because we're always looking towards the future, right? So our past is basically our memories. So we're always reminiscing in the past and thinking about the future. So the more we think, the more we become, disengaged from our bodies. And this is always going to be very difficult, trying to understand why we feel the way that we do and why we take the actions that we do. So again, remembering that you have these tendencies and this anxiety, you can gauge how you can approach different things. And this is because mostly what it is that we're comparing what it is to be competent and what it is to be confident. And most oftentimes, what women do is that they're more competent first, and basically that leads to confidence. And what men do is basically they try to fake it until they make it. So they emanate confidence, or some people will read it as cockiness, and basically they become competent after that. So this is the idea of being, conscious competent, unconscious competent, and then the incompetency that you have of being unconscious, and of course, the idea that you can't really do anything because it's almost being inept, but the unconscious incompetency. So understanding that we have different actions that we're trying to take, and mostly what it is that you have traits that the successful people, take and basically hone and make themselves. This is like the true essence of what success is, what it is to be, a person of value within the world. So basically what these good psychopaths, or what we coined the term emotiopaths, do is basically they have a ruthlessness to them, right? And a charm, a focus, mindfulness, mental strength, mental toughness, and action along with this fearlessness. And understanding what these traits are, they basically, are like the seven deadly sins and, the virtues and everything like that. So these are the seven deadly wins for psychopaths. And focusing on what it is to change ourselves is going through the motions of understanding that, what they do is strengthen this focus, right? It's almost like working out a muscle. This presence is basically living in love, if that makes sense. And, you can always understand what this is because you feel it off people. Sometimes it's just the energy that most people have or the charisma, but is this energy that's coming out. That's why, one of the most famous serial killers is Ted Bundy, and of course he was on his way to actually become a lawyer, right? So he represented himself in his trial and everything like that, but people thought he was so charismatic, People actually thought he was going to win his own case, but of course, there's no possible way that you can't deny the undeniable facts. But going into it, you saw how charismatic he was and how he lured these women into helping him. And it's almost like you're trying to help people by letting them help you at the same time. So it's almost like a seduction process. So you're understanding this, and you can also, use an illusion of how sirens seduce many masses of men, right? It's the same way how you have exotic dancers do the same thing. Basically, they create this desire. And what we're doing is creating desire inside of us so people can create that own desire themselves. And this is the emotional contagion that we're doing. So understanding what that is, we take in consideration, the characteristics that we're trying to do. So basically, first, what we're trying to do is be ruthless, right? Have no prisoners, right? Basically, what it is having no mercy for anything that you do. This is very important because, you should never apologize for who you are, ever. Now, you should apologize if you know you were wrong. If you have at least 1%, doubt in your mind that you might have contributed to something, you can always apologize. But of course, circumstances are completely different, and of course, there needs to be explanation on both sides. But always in an interaction with another person, you always want to take in consideration of that. But also, what it is that you have to understand that what you're doing is being on your purpose. Whether you're a woman, whatever man you think you are, or, whether you identify with a different kind of gender, what you're trying to do is understand that you have a core purpose, why you're living in life. And basically this gives us more essence, right? We're feeding the fire that's inside of us. And basically what it is that we're trying to understand that there's almost like a trifecta to a lot of things. People think in trifectas, and this complexity of being like water is, delving into our emotions. And sometimes, being solid is the most, useful thing that you can do. But mostly what it is that you're trying to switch, right? You're always trying to form this new form, right? You're transforming all the time. And that's what it is to be like water, because psychopaths are basically going with the flow of life. And it's very interesting because of this, they have no anxiety. So basically what we're doing is, filling our emotions once we feel it, if that makes sense. We're not really thinking about it. The more we think about it, the more difficult it is to get out of that mind state. So mostly what it is, courage is first action and then the thinking of the action, right? So you're understanding that. And, this idea that, I think before therefore I am by Descartes was, a philosophy that still happens till today, because what we think is a lot of the reality that we emanate and we basically manifest. So what psychopaths do is they don't even reminisce on that. They know what they know, and what they know is exactly what they feel is to hold true. So of course, again, going back to the idea that sometimes what we feel is right is not exactly what is right. So again, this creates focus. And then, of course, out of this focus, we become charmful, right? And charming. And, you know, it's really interesting because mostly you're having fun with it. You're interacting and you're playful and you have this child essence to you. It's almost like you'll never die. Almost in a sense like that. And basically what it is that we're letting go of our fear of dying. Because that is the greatest thing that, you know, has always been in the back of our minds, because we always know that we're not going to live forever, that we're mortal. So this mental toughness is basically going through the motions of everyday life and understanding that you always, you know, have to be able to take on the world. As you take on your world, you take on your girl, or if you take on the world, you lead your man, right, to take on the world with you. So basically, as a woman, you're allowing the man to help you take over the world, right? So interesting enough, you know, that becomes fearlessness, right? You don't fear anything with this relationship that you have. We're always going to have some need for the opposite sex just because we're, you know, two halves of one whole, and that's always going to be that. We're always going to have some attraction to one another. So you always have to be mindful about that. And mostly what it is taking the action of going through the motions. So, you know, success doesn't come in bed and breakfast in. I wish it did, but mostly what it is that you're taking the chance of failing. You have to understand that. And, you know, once you understand that, you can start applying what you think is right. And of course, this is always through constant repetition, trial and error, and everything like that. You learn how to do something by learning that you shouldn't do it, or, you know, you have this innate behavior, right? It becomes something that you've never experienced before, right? Jamais vu, right? The opposite of deja vu. You've never done it before. But, you know, it's almost like once you start transcending from jamais vu to deja vu, it's almost like you already knew what you already knew. So you become unconsciously competent of what you're doing. That's mostly what it is, right? So you go through the different stages of competency, and once you do that, you can actually be confident. Really confident. You know, of course, sometimes we always have to start with the confidence, but knowing what we already know is the most important thing that we know. Why? Because, you know, a lot of the things that we've done in our past we're not very proud of, but mostly think about if you're really, you know, taking the time to look at yourself, you know, your successes, actually love yourself, you see that you don't really regret the person that you are right now. So that's mostly what we're going to work towards. Of course, it's not easy. It's never, ever easy. It's going to take a lot of time. But the moments that we separate ourselves from time, we have all the time in the world. Why? Because it doesn't exist. And basically what it is that, you know, the world never stops turning. It's always constant. So that means that life is always going. That means that while we're sleeping, someone else is awake, working, right? So that is the flow of life. And that's what we have to go towards. We have to be like water, once again. Alright, guys. So mostly what I wanted to get out of this is the presence of charisma, of a psychopath, right? So we're going deeper and deeper, penetrating through karma, right? Like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? It's almost like I let you into my mind so you know what's wrong with me. Basically, it's understanding that presence is this action that we're trying to separate ourselves so we have no anxiety of the future. We're basically living in the now. Now, there's going to be a dedication especially to The Power of Now, the book by Eckhart Tolle, And what I'm going to do is teach you how to be present. Like, literally teach you how to be present. So you don't have to read the book. The Audible is pretty long, but, you know, for the most part, I'll do it as quickly as possible so you understand the overall concept of what it is. Of course, it might be a little difficult to understand, so it's going to be a little bit slower than normal, but mostly what it is going to teach you how to feel what it feels to be present. Alright, guys? So I'm out and about, what I just talked about. Peace.